Westwood One Sports presents to you the most unique show in sports.
I'm going to say something now that some may take as a hot take, and I don't really care because I know that I'm right.
A show so staggeringly awesome and unapologetically original, you won't know what hit you.
Do you ever just get down on your knees and thank God that you know me and have access to my dementia?
Featuring the man himself, Nick Kostos.
For anyone else who says, oh, he's exaggerating, he's prisoner of the moment. First off, shut up. This is the National Football League. This is not the Big 12. It's not Pop Warner. An absolute disgrace, an atrocity, an affront. One of the most disgraceful performances that I have ever seen in 35 years watching National Football League football.
This is You Better You Bet, presented by BetMGM on Westwood One Sports.
What's up, everybody? Happy and merry, tremendous Football Thursday to you and yours. This is You Better You Bet with Nick Kostos on Westwood One Sports, as we bring you the fastest show in all of sports. The show presented today and always by BetMGM. Make it legendary by downloading the BetMGM app and visiting BetMGM.com. And on this Thursday morning, the world of sports is alive. And we're going to get to all the big stories, including the high-profile NFL job that nobody seems to want, what it is, what it means, and how it could impact next season and beyond in the National Football League. That is coming up later this hour. I'm going to tell all of you, all the listeners, all the viewers here on You Better You Bet, why Giannis, and you're going to disagree with this, I almost guarantee it, but I'm going to tell you why. Giannis Antetokounmpo needs to embrace his inner Shawn Michaels circa 1992. It's time for Giannis to go full heel. It's time. He's teasing it. It's time to make the turn. Ahead of the trade deadline, I'm going to tell you why that's the case after yet another miserable Milwaukee Bucks performance last night and another half-heel, half-face Giannis quote to the media after last night's game. 3 tremendous guests will join us today on the show. Odyssey Sports NFL insider Brian Baldinger. Looking forward to that spot with Baldy, talking Conference Championship Sunday in the NFL and more. The whale capper Drew Dinsick will join us. His best bets for the Conference Championship games. We'll talk some NBA with Whale as well. And former Major League Baseball general manager and friend of the show, Steve Phillips of MLB Network and MLB Network Radio, on the Mets trade for Freddie Peralta, the Yankees re-signing of Cody Bellinger, and everything going on right now in Major League Baseball, as baseball's got a lot of momentum right now in the month of January as we push towards the start of the new season. Steve Phillips will join us in the final hour of the show. And speaking of the final hour of the show, which of course is the Power Hour, all our bets for tonight will close the program. And I do have some bets in the NBA that I really love for tonight. YouTube.com/@thekostos is the YouTube address if you're listening to the show right now on the Odyssey app or Sirius or the Westwood One app, Sirius 375. Check out the show on YouTube, youtube.com/@thekostos. And the phone number, 310-840-4910, 310-840-4910. But we officially begin the tremendous Football Thursday edition of You Better You Bet in Buffalo, with one of the most incompetent press conferences forget about sports, in the United States of this century. It's like 2017 United Airlines, customer forcibly removed from flight. United Airlines gives one of the most disastrous public relations answers that we've seen in modern American history. People go nuts. It's like that and the Bills press conference following the firing of head coach Sean McDermott. This press conference featuring the newly minted Buffalo Bills president of football operations, Brandon Beane, and Bills owner, Terry Pegula. Now, before I get into it, the press conference itself. What was said, why it's ridiculous, and why if you're a Bills fan, I think you have legitimate reason for concern moving forward. I need to start by saying this. None of what I'm about to say is a defense of Sean McDermott. None of this is to imply that I think the Bills made a mistake in the firing of Sean McDermott. Now, you watch the show, you listen to the show, and if you're new to the show today, thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate you. But if you've been listening to the show or watching the show for any amount of time, whether it be years, whether it be months, hell, whether it be weeks, like 1 week, leading up to Saturday's divisional round game, which the Bills lost in overtime to the Broncos, you know my feeling on the matter. I have felt like Sean McDermott has needed to go 4 years. And I praised it earlier this week when the Buffalo Bills actually did it, and they pulled the trigger, and they fired Sean McDermott. And it doesn't mean that McDermott's a bad coach, just that the expiration date had been reached. And not everything that Terry Pegula said yesterday in the press conference was horrible, or was wrong, or was something worthy of laughter, worthy of criticism, or worthy of scorn. When Terry Pegula talked about why he fired Sean McDermott, I thought it made a lot of sense. And you don't have to agree with it. I do. But you don't have to agree with it. You, the listener, you, the viewer. But I think you have to acknowledge, even if you disagree with the decision, that the thought process behind it is pretty sound. It really, really is. When Pegula talks about walking into the Bills' locker room on Saturday following the overtime loss in Denver and seeing his quarterback, is the way he described it, Josh Allen, that Josh Allen's in tears with his head down and he's inconsolable. And Pegula walks up to Josh Allen and talks about like the bad call on which I still think is a good call, the McMillan interception on the Brandon Cooks. Did he catch it? Did he not? And he references, Pegula says to Josh Allen, bad call. And Allen doesn't even pick his head up as he's sobbing. And he talks about the scene in the locker room. Now, we know that Terry Pegula is not making that up. Because to a man, to a woman, every single Bills writer and reporter that described that post-game scene and that particular locker room all said this was like a unique event. That they had never seen a locker room like this post-game. A group of dejected players like this post-game. And Pegula said, that's why he made the decision to fire Sean McDermott. Because it felt like they had hit the proverbial playoff wall and they were hitting it year after year after year. So you might look at that quote and say, okay, he fired him because they lost to Denver, and say knee-jerk reaction. I think it's the opposite. I think that if this were just one solitary loss in the McDermott era, there's no way they fire him. This is the cumulative effect of loss after loss. Soul-crushing defeat after soul-crushing defeat. Heart-stopping end-game failure after heart-stopping end-game failure that led to this decision to fire Sean McDermott. And in a postseason with no Mahomes, no Lamar, no Burrow, the Bills blew it. Period. And I'm not willing to entertain arguments to the contrary. And if you watch the game on Saturday, and I bet Buffalo, so I am acutely aware of this, the Bills were the better team in the game. They were. And you can criticize Josh Allen, whatever. If Josh Allen plays a cleaner game, the Bills win that game by 20. But you're never firing the MVP quarterback, so Sean McDermott had to go. So I had no issues with what Terry Pegula did, firing Sean McDermott, and I had zero issue with his rationale behind the firing of Sean McDermott. I get it, and I agree with it. Totally fine, all good in my book. Now, let's talk about the general manager. And now the president of football operations got promoted in Brandon Beane. Now, again, I will preface what I'm about to say with this to set the stage. In my estimation, the Buffalo Bills have Josh Allen. And that should be like the old when Stephen A. Smith had his show, Quite Frankly, for ESPN, which was like, I don't think lasted that long, but set the stage for a pretty legendary career for him. The show is called Quite Frankly, and at the end of the commercial, like for the show, he goes, the Patriots had Tom Brady, and quite frankly, that's all they need. And I don't know why I remember that. I found it funny, and I still remember it to this day. And I will paraphrase and imitate Stephen A. Smith here and just say, like the Buffalo Bills have Josh Allen. And quite frankly, that should be all they need. We see throughout history, throughout the history of the league, and we don't even have to leave like the last 10 years, the last 15 years, this century, to know this. The most talented team does not always win the Super Bowl. And you know this, the listener and the viewer, because you are an educated sports fan. You are an educated football fan. You don't need, obviously you don't want to have an untalented roster, but the most talented team doesn't always win. We know that because we watch football on a year in, year out basis. And in my estimation, this is where I think that we go a little too far, where we say, well, like the Bills, like the roster sucks, they can't win. Stop it. Stop it. They have Josh Allen. And the roster is not filled with curtain jerking jabronis. And I don't even mean this as a full-throated defense of Brandon Beane, that he's done this unbelievable job, right? You can certainly critique Brandon Beane's team building, the lack of Pro Bowlers that he's drafted, some high-profile misses. Not that some of these players are bad, like A.J. Epineza and Gregory Rousseau, for instance, 2 pass rushers, are not bad players, but you'd like to get more out of them. Like they're not all busts, but maybe you haven't gotten everything that you'd like to get out of these players. So Brandon Beane is not a perfect general manager, and I'm not trying to say he is. My whole point with this is, if you've got Josh Allen, the fact that they haven't even gotten to a Super Bowl, like if you get there and you get blown out in the Super Bowl, at least you can say we got there. They never even got to a Super Bowl. Unforgivable. Unforgivable. And to me, that's on the coaching staff. And you can argue it's on the players, but again, you're never firing the quarterback who's won the MVP, who's going to go to the Hall of Fame. Someone has to be the fall guy. And that fall guy is Sean McDermott. Now, as it concerns Brandon Beane, if he had been fired along with Sean McDermott, I would not have batted an eyelash. I would have understood, said, okay, like you want it, like whole new start here, fresh start, hit the reset button. I would have totally gotten it. Also, the fact that he's staying, I don't really have much of an issue with either. If you want some organizational stability, and if you believe, and maybe you don't, but you have to acknowledge that there's at least some value behind it, some basis behind it, that part of the reason why the Bills have continued to fall short is because of the players that Sean McDermott demands to have on his defense. And when I say demands, I don't mean like he's pounding the table like I'm going to fire you if you don't get these guys, but you hire a defensive coach, he runs a certain scheme, you get players to fit that scheme, and maybe the players that you're getting and the scheme is not good enough. And the defense always falls apart when it matters the most. I think all of these things are fair to potentially say. So again, what could be more fair than me saying, if he gets fired, I wouldn't have batted an eyelash, but I understand the rationale to bring him back. Now here's where things completely fall apart for Brandon Beane and for Terry Pegula and the Buffalo Bills and their brain trust, and where this press conference took a turn to the theater of the absurd. Take a listen to this sound of Pegula and Brandon Beane talking about second-round wide receiver from a couple years ago, Keon Coleman, from the press conference yesterday.
Yeah, can I interrupt? I'll address the Keon situation. The coaching staff pushed to draft Keon. I'm not saying Brandon wouldn't have drafted him, but he wasn't his next choice. That was Brandon being a team player. He's taken, for some reason, heat over it and not saying a word about it, but I'm here to tell you the true story.
Okay. So that's a lie. So Terry Pegula is lying. I don't even want to say that he's lying. He may believe that what he's saying is true, which is even worse than lying, I think, is to actually say something like that and believe it's true. And the reason why we know it isn't true is because this was like when Jamar Chase spit on Jalen Ramsey and goes, well, I didn't spit on him. And then within minutes, because the internet never forgets, here's 100 different like Zapruder-style film angles of Jamar Chase spitting on Jalen Ramsey. We know it happened. In the same way that hashtag the internet doesn't forget. And we know that Brandon Beane wanted to draft Keon Coleman. That he wanted to make the pick. Which doesn't mean that Sean McDermott, maybe Joe Brady didn't want him also, but Beane wanted to make the pick. There are multiple videos out there. Multiple. That like the Bills put out themselves of Brandon Beane leading up to that pick. They had the first pick of the second round. They could have traded that pick. They stood pat and picked Keon Coleman. And Brandon Beane wanted to make the pick. Again, how do we know? Because there's indisputable video and audio evidence that supports it. It's not AI slop. It's real. Beane wanted him. So is Pegula lying? I think that's doubtful. I think what's happening here is Beane's probably manipulating the situation. Now, here's where I think it really is just like, if that's all true, then what we have here is like, and I'll bring up a couple television shows here that you, the listener, and you, the viewer, are probably familiar with. This is like in Game of Thrones, right? The Red Wedding. You know, Roose Bolton and Walder Frey and Tywin Lannister all plotting against the Starks. Or in season 1 of The Sopranos, when Tony puts a hit out on Phil Parisi, right, who's Patsy Parisi's identical twin brother, and that's a storyline moving forward the rest of the series, with Patsy Parisi, including some people thinking Patsy's the one that ordered the hit on Tony in the final episode of the show. Or, you know, in like Succession, which I think is one of the best shows of all time. One of Kendall Roy's 9,000 plots against his dad, Logan Roy, to take over Waystar Royco. Now imagine in any of these like fictional scenarios, hypothetical scenarios, where this happens, right? Like the Red Wedding. Like we see Roose Bolton and company in a room, and they are making the plans, and they slaughter the Stark family, right? And they kill Robb Stark, and they kill Catelyn Stark, and they kill his bride, etc. And then the next day, there's a press conference. And they have to get up in front of the media and answer questions. And like the media knows if they're lying, because there's evidence that supports everything that's happened, and they get up there and lie. Or Tony Soprano's got to get up there and give a press conference and say, I didn't order the hit on Phil Parisi. And it's like, well, actually, we know that you did. Or, hey, Kendall, we know you're plotting against your dad for the 9 millionth time. We have the evidence here. And they lie through their teeth. There's a press conference. Things are being brought to light. And like Beane and Pegula think they're going to get away with this outright lie? Now, the stakes are way lower here, obviously, right? Like, no one's lost their lives. I'm not trying to equate this to that, but it's the idea that there's this backstage machinations, the backstage politics, the lying and the manipulating that's usually left in the dark has now been brought to the light. Because Terry Pegula, for whatever reason, decided to say what he said when there is actual video and audio evidence to the contrary. And here's where, if you're a Bills fan, you can get rightly upset. Because now, it's not just that Brandon Beane is not picking the right players, if you have a beef with Brandon Beane and the way he picks the players. Now, you know that he's plotted against McDermott. Because what other conclusion could you draw, you as a logical person, you as a rational person, other than, in order for Brandon Beane to save his own ass, that this is what he did? That he threw McDermott under the bus, which, by the way, is the same thing Sean McDermott did a couple years ago after a cataclysmic and unacceptable Monday night loss to the Denver Broncos when he fired Ken Dorsey and promoted Joe Brady because he needed to save his own ass, right? But this would be like if McDermott got called up to a presser and McDermott lied through his teeth about it and got caught. This is what happened with Beane and Pegula. So now, Bills fans know that Brandon Beane is a backstage politician, to use a pro wrestling term. And not that, like, there aren't a ton of them, but now you know. Now you know. And as it concerns the owner now, Terry Pegula, who Sabres fans in Buffalo, and I'll be quick on the Sabres part, Sabres fans do not like Terry Pegula. And nationally, you, the listener, you, the viewer, may not know or may not care that that's the case. And that's totally fine. They're like a nondescript, what has become an irrelevant team in the National Hockey League. Pegula bought the team in 2011. They have missed the playoffs 14 consecutive years. 14 straight years under the ownership of Terry Pegula. And this is, as someone who, I'm a hockey fan, I grew up a hockey fan, this is a once proud franchise. The franchise of Pat LaFontaine and Alexander Mogilny and Dave Andrechuk and the great Dominic Hasek and Ryan Miller more recently, that has been relegated to total irrelevance by this ownership group. Because they fired GMs and they fired coaches and they've swapped out players and they still stink, which means there's one constant, and it's the owner. And you also have the owner who, like, whether Keon Coleman stinks or not, and whether he doesn't take his job seriously or not, and he's a healthy scratch for games this season, like, it doesn't matter. It is very, very unsavory for an owner to get up there and talk about and drag a young player through the mud like Terry Pegula did. Whether Coleman deserves it or not, whether he says it behind closed doors or not, you can't do that publicly and drag an asset of yours and a human being of yours through the mud like that if you're the owner of the team. So now, Bills fans are thinking, damn, are we about to become the Sabres? Is that what's about to happen? The good news here, from my perspective, there's no chance that's true. Zero. At least not until Josh Allen retires. You still have a future first ballot Hall of Famer, a quarterback in Josh Allen. Still have that. And yes, things can go wrong, even though it feels like they can't with Allen. The Chiefs just missed the playoffs. It's not impossible. But man, it's hard to imagine the Bills ever being bad as long as number 17 is playing quarterback. And I still think that whoever this head coach is that they hire next, I have no idea who it's going to be. We'll get to one of the candidates in the next segment. I give the Bills a better chance to win the Super Bowl with whoever it is than with Sean McDermott, because McDermott had proven he couldn't get them over the hump. But what we have now is a situation with the owner and GM where all of a sudden they're showing their asses. And if you're Brandon Beane, the seat about to get real hot. And if you're Terry Pegula, not that your seat's hot because you're the owner, but you are about, because it's one thing for Sabres fans to be pissed and hockey fans to be pissed. You get Bills fans pissed. You get NFL fans pissed. This is an entirely different level of scrutiny for Terry Pegula. I still think the Bills are going to be okay moving forward. But now, you can at least call that into doubt and into question. And that, where we've ended up, is not something I expected, even after firing Sean McDermott. Just getting rolling here on a tremendous Football Thursday. On the other side, we will talk about one of the candidates for the Buffalo Bills head coaching job and the job that he doesn't want, this candidate, and why that matters so much for the 2026 NFL season and beyond. You better you bet on a Thursday. Nick Kostos, Westwood One Sports.